Greetings again, indie game fans. Welcome back to I Dream of Indie. This is Ole Gamer Joe here with another review for you today. If it's your first time here on the channel, we welcome you. Consider hitting that subscribe button below for all of the latest indie game reviews and previews. Today we're taking a look at Gods Will Fall from developer Clever Beans and publisher Deep Silver. Clever Beans are made up of former AAA studio members that have now decided to go at indie. And of course, Deep Silver is more notorious for publishing AAA games. So this is a nice marriage. We're seeing a bigger publisher work with a smaller developer. I love it. Gods Will Fall is available right now on the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, PC Steam, which is where we played it, the Nintendo Switch, and Stadia. Gods Will Fall starts out with a very beautiful opening cinematic that sets the stage for a pretty basic story, actually, as the goal is to play as 8 different survivors, which are randomly generated for you, that will try to overthrow the gods who have ruled this world for far too long. Now initially, Gods Will Fall threw me for quite the loop, as you're actually controlling all 8 of these characters at once. You literally move together. I was like, what the heck kind of game is this gonna be? I'm confused, but at any rate, don't worry, that's not a theme throughout the game. That's simply how it controls on the overworld map, and it's not that big of a deal. This island is pretty huge, but to start things out, you do have a little bit of a tutorial level that will teach you the basic rundown of how things work without having to say too much at all. But before we even get into that, let's talk about just entering one of these areas, these dungeons, let's call them. Well, for one, you have to actually pick a character and go in solo, and that character can't leave once they enter. Certain characters in your group might be really excited about entering these dungeons. Yeah, I want to kill a god, let's get in there. So of course they get a statistical boost. You might want to select those characters, just saying. Each of the 8 different characters do have different statistics from one another, so some characters might be speedier, some might be slower and stronger, so do choose carefully. Whichever poor sucker you end up choosing to go in there, either he or she is in for a world of hurt, and should they die on the god or one of the enemies within these labyrinths, they're dead for good until you send someone else in there after they're asked to try and save them. Combat's pretty basic in this game, and it's actually quite heavy feeling. You have a quick attack, which really isn't all that quick, though it's quicker than the heavy attack that can deal out more damage. You have the ability to parry, if you're good at that kind of thing. Ole Gamer Joe certainly isn't. But one of the more interesting gameplay elements, outside of just being able to throw objects back at enemies to deal out damage, is the fact that you can collect blood by successfully hitting enemies, and this will help you to restore your health. Outside of all of that, your character can dash backwards, which more or less acts as the dodge mechanic of this game, and it works effectively enough given the fact that most of the enemies are pretty slow, but they pack one hell of a punch. For as much originality as this game features, it's a little disappointing that they went with such a basic combat system that is a little bit slow and a little bit sluggish for my taste, but still, if you're a fan of Souls games, I think you'll feel quite comfortable with it, and you'll certainly enjoy the challenge, particularly on these bosses, these gods, which are extremely difficult depending on the location that you're in, and they can take you out, and it's going to lead to a lot of frustration and a lot of swearing. As far as the actual adventuring goes in Gods Will Fall, it does take a little bit of a backseat to the overall combat system and trying to get to these gods. Exploring these environments is a joy though, just because they look so beautiful, which we'll touch on a little bit more in the graphics section. Ultimately though, things do feel pretty tense in these dungeons just based on the fact that you can potentially lose your life and you might not be coming back, so each of the 8 characters is so important. You don't want to lose them if you want to successfully take down all 10 gods, obviously. Success means everything though, and taking down a god is important not only because you got rid of the son of a gun, but because you get great treasures, and ultimately your party gets a lot stronger, which will allow you to take down some of the more difficult areas of the game. Overall, even though the combat isn't necessarily my cup of tea, and this one's just a bit too hard for Ole Gamer Joe, I really do like all of the original ideas that they've put into this title, and I think a lot of you out there will appreciate that as well. Graphically, Gods Will Fall looks pretty great. Some wonderful lighting. The island, the overworld looks fantastic actually on the PC version anyways. I didn't play the console versions, obviously. But no, everything ran smoothly. I didn't have any sort of frame rate issues. Some of the environments are pretty intense. There's bloody environments. There's different types of dungeons, despite the fact that they all play out pretty similarly to one another. I like the overall visual aesthetic of this game. The art style initially wasn't my favorite, but I actually ended up growing quite the appreciation for it. The enemy designs are pretty cool, the gods themselves look unique from one another and are quite intense at times, and the overall environments are fun to explore because they look so beautiful. I also tip my hat to the sound design of this game, which is pretty effective. There's not a lot of huge bombastic musical compositions throughout the adventure, but you do get some subtle drums from time to time, and you'll hear a lot of the footsteps of enemies and you yourself throughout these dungeons, and of course the slashing of the different weapons. It all works pretty well. I honestly had a hard time with this review. It was tough to put my thoughts together because on one hand, I think this game is really original and cool, but on the other hand, I didn't necessarily like the overly difficult bosses, and the combat system wasn't my cup of tea. But there are some really cool dungeons to explore. It's an interesting world full of unique ideas. I kind of recommend checking this one out, but do be prepared for a combat system that might or might not be your cup of tea. So what do you think? Will you be checking out Gods Will Fall? Let us know in the comments section below, and if you have enjoyed our video coverage today, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell notification to keep up with all the latest indie game reviews and previews. There's a ton of other ways to support I Dream of Indie right down in the description box below. We have a merchandise store as well as offer memberships here on the channel. However you end up supporting us, it really means the world. We thank you so much. See you for the next review. Just click on through.